What is up, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of Father Dynasty. I am your fatherly host, Chew, here in the manhole, here to talk a little fatherhood, a little Dynasty fantasy football. And I want to give you a reminder, like, subscribe, comment, whatever you got to do on YouTube, on Spotify, wherever you're enjoying this thing. I'd really appreciate it. And if you check out the website, www.fatherdynasty.com, cannot believe that wasn't taken. Check out episodes, get you some merch. I know I've got my Nickelodeon purple going on right now, so I'd really appreciate if you check out a shirt, a sweatshirt, a coffee mug maybe, and appreciate a support of the show. On this week's episode, I've got a Fatherhood in 5, where I do talk a little bit about my wife and I reclaiming our basement from our son, as well as catching up with friends, talking kids, and of course, the chaos that has been the free agency of the NFL. So without further ado, here's Fatherhood in 5. So for this week's Fatherhood in 5, and again, for those that are new to this whole thing, Fatherhood in 5 is when I talk about my current experience as a father in what I believe to be 5 minutes, give or take. And in this week, I want to point out it's important to stay young. And how my wife and I are navigating that now is in our current house, which we moved into in March, it will be 1 year. We basically allowed the basement to be able to be taken over by our son in terms of he's got toys, he's got a little trampoline, he's got a tent type thing. It looks like a spaceship kind of sort of. He's got his own TV down there when we're all, down there on the couch watching everything. And we've decided to morph it into, he still has, plenty of toys down there to play with, but we're also going to tweak it a little bit so that we have our own oasis, if you will. And better utilize the fridge that is right around the corner from there that I think we've only ever had one thing in. And it will now have nothing but alcohol in it. And what we were thinking was, we'll scoot some stuff around, get one couch out of there. We're going to have a pool table. We're going to have a dartboard. My wife got me this awesome decoration, which is it's a piece of a barrel, like a whiskey barrel, and has a rustle on it and everything. We have that. We have the dartboard. We have a live edge shelf with like kind of little industrial mounting that we had a buddy make years ago now that we've had in each of our houses in different spots. And what else do we have? We also have, my wife made me a shot ski. Shout out to Watch What Happens Live, which it was literally a ski that she had got and was able to mount different shot holders, I think 4 in total, to the shot to make it a shot ski. And it's pretty awesome, if I'm going to be honest. Although I did learn there's an appreciation for the shot ski, and it is a communal thing, of course. So when you get people on board, one, acknowledge the height differences. If there's height differences, you have to have whoever's the shortest, you have to kind of get to their level. Because if you don't, then you end up, they're throwing it back towards you before you're down at it and you're just wearing a shot. And if everyone's not on the same page for the timing of it, if you go to throw it back and people aren't ready for it, you also get blasted in the face. And not like Sonny, I mean in a negative way. And my wife's idea, which is incredible in terms of decoration down there, aside from the things I previously mentioned, is to include, we're starting with 7 for now, but we may add more later, movie posters that will be framed. And these were the couple I picked. I could have kept going. And who knows, if we end up, having more space to be able to do that, and we like the idea, then maybe I'll get to do this. So my 4 of the 7 are, so I've got 007 Goldfinger, the James Bond movie, Boondock Saints, of course, Anchorman, of course, and then I've got Jaws. And then there's a nice contrast of all of those, because then she had chose Mean Girls, of course, a classic, the first Harry Potter, and Pretty Woman. So if you can imagine, I think once we actually put them up, what it's going to look like, I guess, in terms of the one that I picked, one that she picked, kind of contrasting one another as we go along. Because it would just be kind of pretty funny to have Boondock Saints, Mean Girls, and then Jaws. Just kind of seems they all none of it seems to make much sense in that case. But it speaks to our taste. And then I also recently, as we were putting that up, I found out she'd never seen Jaws, and that was shocking to me. And another big part of the recent fatherhood journey was getting catch up with my good buddy Tyler. He's been on the podcast a number of times, and got to meet up with him, his wife Megan, beautiful baby girl Emma, and so Finn and Emma, Finn my son, got to meet Emma. So my wife and I are very excited to go to Blacksburg. That was mine and my buddy Tyler's college town that we went to, Virginia Tech, and very close by my wife's college, Radford. And it was very cool to go catch up with them. They're living down in Charlotte, so don't get to see them, at least in person, too often. And of course, as I mentioned, the first time that Finn and Emma get to meet each other. And shout out to them for, they made that trip down. They were catching up with family, of course, as well. And another shout out, Cabo Fish Taco. I've only been there. This was my second time now. The carne asada is the shit. I had no idea. I don't know what I got the first time. Clearly the wrong thing, but unbelievable. So anyone who's not been to Cabo Fish Taco, I assume everyone has by this point. But if you haven't been in a while, go back. Be a patron, because unbelievable. But getting back to the story, of course, as most things go, as you become parents, and each time you kind of catch up in person, certainly, a little bit of reminiscing about the good old days, but also most of it is just kind of filling the gaps of like what parenting updates and things you've gone through and swapping war stories almost. So it was, of course, good to talk parenting stuff and all that, pepper in a couple, Office and Will Ferrell movie references, as Tyler and I always do. And as we were leaving, because this was in, again, college town of Blacksburg, as we were leaving there in the downtown area, so plenty of people walking around, made me feel plenty old to see some of the kids on campus and have me realize that I'm over half a decade removed from college. As you can tell, this was a willing cutting of my hair, but it was going thin, and blame that on fatherhood, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I'm getting up there. So overall, fatherhood in 5, trying to stay young, but also acknowledging I'm old. So there's that good balance there. So that was indeed fatherhood in 5. So this next segment, and this will be this one and the next one, are related to the chaos that is NFL free agency. And it seems exceptionally chaotic this year. I was looking back to see if that was actually the case or if it's just kind of a recency bias. No, I would say this is actually pretty crazy. And some of the stats I'm going to give you here, the salary contract type information is going to be from SpotTrack, and then any of the fantasy stats are going to be from Roto Underworld or Player Profiler. And just for a reference point, so in 2021, for the QB1, which was Josh Allen, just so you can understand some of these reference points, Josh Allen had 24.6 fantasy points per game. Jonathan Taylor, the RB1, had 19.6 points per game. Cooper Kupp, wide receiver 1, had 17.3 points per game. And Mark Andrews had 11.4 points per game. That's all just kind of something to grasp onto as I kind of mention these next players and where they're at in terms of their production, what their contracts are, what the guarantees are. And I'll start off with a doozy here because I don't know what this team's doing. Christian Kirk, the 25-year-old Christian Kirk, going from the Cardinals to the Jags, 4-year, $72 million deal, 37 guaranteed, but he's now become an $18 million a year receiver. This is on the heels of Amari Cooper being traded to the Browns, which I will mention later about that trade package, for, in my opinion, mere peanuts because he was being paid as a $20 million a year receiver. And that was considered to be too much, despite his production. And I sincerely don't I guess the Jaguars, having the cap that they do, they can afford to overpay a guy like Christian Kirk. They can afford to pay, and I'll get to it in a second, a guy like Zay Jones. They can afford to overpay Evan Ingram. I guess it just makes sense at that point. And I understand wanting to surround Trevor Lawrence with weapons. But I don't know that this is the way to do it. So just a reference point, like I was mentioning some of those, for wide receiver, Cooper Kupp having 17.3 points a game. So from 2019 to 2021, Christian Kirk had 12.8, 10.5, and 12.2 fantasy points per game. And I know that they had just, leading into this season, or the 2021 season, they had drafted Rondale Moore, which the belief was that he could take over that slot role. And the concern was Adrian Green was already there. You have Christian Kirk. Fitzgerald was finally gone. We weren't sure for a while, but was finally gone. And then you have Rondale Moore. You had Max Williams was doing well. Then he got hurt. Then they brought in Zach Ertz. So you're trying to figure out where, Christian Kirk got his. There's no question about that. To think that he is someone who deserves to be paid almost at the level of Amari Cooper, which I understand the Amari Cooper deal was not done yesterday. So at the time that Amari Cooper got that deal, I'm sure that seemed erroneous. And now that Christian Kirk is getting almost that same amount of money per year, it seems erroneous, but it's two separate times. I understand that. But comparatively to the rest of the field, which this next guy I'm going to mention here, I don't understand this at all. And I do want to mention this next guy. He's my guy. I'm very excited that he got in this landing spot. Allen Robinson, not quite 29 years old, but going from the Bears to the Rams. Love it. And a 3-year, $46.5 million, about 31 guaranteed. His production, dropped off a cliff in 2021. The mixture was missing some games, but again, that's why I look at the per game point totals. So it went from, in 2019, 15.9, 16.4 to, in 2021, 7.3. And I don't think that we can attribute that entirely to him being hurt a little bit. It truly, just watching some of their games, they didn't even want to involve him, and I don't understand why. And much of it was watching Justin Fields play, just getting beaten to death with that atrocious O-line, and the fact that he was holding onto the ball as long as he was, whether that be on him, whether that be on the play calling of it took so long for the play to develop and people to get open. Probably a little bit of both. But I can only imagine how frustrated Allen Robinson was. He got tagged, so he was essentially forced to come back for that 1 year. Got paid plenty fine. There's no doubt about that. But him being the age that he was, I'm sure he wanted to get that one additional deal to cash in. I'm so glad that he did. And, he's going to ball out on the Rams. And I was a little bit worried initially because I'm a big Van Jefferson guy, of course, because I have him in Dynasty. And he did well last year. Then Woods goes down, got excited. Then OBJ comes in, I'm less excited. OBJ goes down, and then when they did this deal, I know within a day or two, I want to say, they ended up, Woods gets traded to the Titans, which makes sense. So I'm excited to have that stack of Allen Robinson and Van Jefferson, both of whom I think can thrive incredibly well next to Cooper Kupp in that offense with Matt Stafford throwing to him. And let's see. So the next one, probably not as sexy of a player, but I think is a solid contributor that has been improving year over year. And if he can earn the trust of Tom Brady pretty quickly, I think Russell Gage can do well. So he'll be getting a 3-year, $30 million deal with 20 guaranteed. He'd been doing better year over year, and then considering with Julio leaving town, and then it was he and Ridley bowing out because of some issues that he was going through, which he's now suspended for gambling on his own team. Whatever. Not even going to get into that one right now. But 7.1 points a game in 2019, going up to 11.3 per game, and then 11.6 per game in 2021. I do think he can do well in Tampa, but I think if you are looking between, you got Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, I know he's recovering. Scotty Miller, I believe, is still there. Jalen Darden, I'm a huge fan of. I was hoping he'd get more opportunity, but he was at least getting the return work. And I know they got their tight ends as well. We'll see what Gronk does, but I would like to think that he's going to get a lot of play. I think you don't give that kind of a deal to somebody for no reason. I think he can do well, but as I've learned with any of Tom Brady's receivers, you need to earn his trust and put in the work in the offseason if it's going to be your first season with the team. And if he does that, I mean, I think he'll do plenty fine, but we'll see how that goes. This next guy I'm pretty excited about. I think he's done incredibly well for his, I believe, 9 years with his initial team, the Bengals. CJ Uzomah going to the Jets on a 3-year, $24 million deal, 15 guaranteed. He, in this past season, had a number of just boom games, which kind of propelled his fantasy stock a bit. But when you look at his injury history, I believe it was 2019, he had a pretty devastating injury. And he'd done better and better and better. And he was at least kind of like that safety blanket. Big bodied tight end. From what I've heard, a great locker room guy. And the fact that the Jets are getting him and a guy that I won't get mentioned separately, but Tyler Conklin, a tight end from Minnesota, they're really just adding every weapon they possibly can around Zach Wilson. I'm excited about it. I did trade for him later in the year, this past year in Dynasty, swapping going from Tua to Zach Wilson and improving a pick for a full round, I believe. I'm excited to see what they're doing in New York. I know there's plenty of times when that's what's said in the offseason and it just all goes to shit. But I do think that them rebuilding that O-line, including these tight ends here with Uzomah and Conklin, and that good receiving core, they have that backfield, and I would assume in the draft that's probably going to be adding another weapon or two. So I'm very excited to see how that develops. And back to the question mark that is the Jaguars, is the deal Zay Jones, almost 27 years old. Couldn't believe that. I know he's been around for a while, but couldn't believe that. 3-year, $24 million, 14 guaranteed. Looking at his fantasy production, I don't get this. And I don't know if it's some preference to him as a player in terms of just like knowledge of him, like working with him before, but 3.5 points per game, 2.3 points per game, 6.2 points per game from 2019 to 2021. I don't get it. I sincerely don't get it. I don't know if it's something with a scheme fit. Even if he is the best blocking wide receiver, I don't understand the money on this one. And only for the sake of, like, even if you wanted him that badly, did you need to pay him this much? Was this important of a thing that you needed to pay that much to get him? That was the part that kind of confused me. Because there's plenty of those guys that are just the good team guys. They contribute, they do well in an NFL sense, in a real game sense, maybe not in a fantasy sense. Those guys don't cost as much. So I don't understand what they're doing. Again, I already mentioned the Christian Kirk one, although Christian Kirk can produce certainly much more for fantasy, but also can open up the field for a real NFL team. So I don't really understand the Zay Jones ones at all. But the next one I'm going to go to, very excited about. So the next one, I did pick him up and I eventually dropped him, I think, for somebody else. But Cedrick Wilson, which I was shocked to find out he was 26 years old. So going from the Cowboys to the Dolphins, getting a 3-year, little over $22 million deal, and just under $13 million guaranteed. So he has also had plenty of those boom bust games. And the boom bust games started in 2020, but they were pretty sparing. And then when you look at 2021, really came alive, 10.7 points a game. So it was earlier in the season for him, I want to say week 5. And he was able to get 104 receiving yards on, it was 10 targets, I want to say 7 receptions, no touchdown. And later in the season, I believe the last game of the season, getting some absurd yardage, getting 2 touchdowns, catching like 5 of 6 targets. And I'm very excited for him to be in Miami. I do think that if Miami's improving that O-line, they're adding weapons to include with Jalen Waddle. They're bolstering out that backfield. Already having Gaskin, bringing in Edmonds, bringing in Mostert. You have that new coach McDaniels. I'm very excited to see what this is going to be. Still have Gesicki as well. And I really think if it's them addressing that O-line in the draft, aside from what they could do in free agency, I think that's going to give Tua more time and allow him to feed all of these mouths that are all very capable fantasy producers as well as just NFL players. And Cedrick Wilson's one of those guys where get the ball in his hands. He's got great size, but he has incredible speed too. And I really think he's going to do well in that Miami offense. So the last two I've got, one guy, DJ Chark, not even 26, only 25 years old. Couldn't believe that either. Coming off an ankle injury earlier on in the 2021 season with the Jaguars. But he'll be going over to the Lions on a 1-year, $8 million deal, fully guaranteed. This was one where I was very confused. His production's gone down year over year, some of which because of injuries, 2019 being the big year, having 14.9 points a game, going down to 11.8, down to 8.6, which again, that was an injury-shortened year. I don't get seeing what the Jaguars did of who they added. Why on earth, if this was the deal that DJ Chark ended up taking, and he went to the Lions, could you not have afforded that? Like, this seems like a frugal deal for a guy who's coming back off of injury, who has proven he can do it and is a great deep threat. I don't know why they would have let him go. And again, it could have been he doesn't want to go back. So even if they would have offered him 1 year, $10 million, he wouldn't have done it. Very possible, and I would understand that. But looking at who the Jaguars added, now I'm just beating him down at this point. How many slot positions are there on the field? I don't understand how many they think are going to be there. But the average depth of target's not going to be very deep because everyone they added is just a bunch of slot guys. And like DJ Chark would have been the one. If you're going to get these other guys, also get DJ Chark back for 1 year, $8 million deal and be able to use him over the top, like outside. I don't know why you wouldn't do that. But seeing him alongside Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think he'll kind of fill that. I believe is it Tyrell Williams? He was the former Charger from back in the day. He was injured for, all of the season last year. So I do think that Chark can step into that role of what it should have been, and they can kind of complement one another well. I don't think Chark is taking anything away from St. Brown. But enough of beating down the Jaguars. We'll jump over to a little more free agency talk, but now we're looking more at the trade side. So the couple of trades here, and a couple of these I've actually spoken about throughout the free agency signings. Amari Cooper, 28-year-old receiver. I keep thinking he's older than that, but he's really not. Going from the Cowboys to the Browns, it was Amari Cooper and a 2022 sixth for a 2022 fifth and a 2022 sixth. I don't get that at all. In terms of fantasy points per game, he was top 30 each year. And, you don't have to love his boom-bust nature to his game. Sometimes, again, he would just disappear. And I get how that can be frustrating from any standpoint, from a fan standpoint, from a fantasy owner standpoint. But it's Amari Cooper. He's got the pedigree. He has the production. I don't understand why on earth that is the cost for Amari Cooper. And again, like I just pointed out, if you're going to tell me that Christian Kirk is worth $2 million a year less than Amari Cooper, then just keep Amari Cooper. That's ridiculous to me. And to point out another deal that is kind of a comparable package, Robert Woods, old Bobby Trees. He is about a year older, going from the Rams to the Titans. Going to be a great compliment to A.J. Brown. But looking at that, Robert Woods for a 2023 sixth. Are you kidding me? He had top 20 each year. Super consistent. 15.5, 15.3, 15.2. I don't understand what's happening. And just to point out, there is some value in those later round picks, but just to point out some notable sixth rounders. This is in the last 2 years, I believe, for drafts. Elijah Mitchell, easily the best one on this list. Khalil Herbert, did very well, and he's a Hokie. Donovan Peoples-Jones, he was expected to be higher in the draft, and he just kind of tumbled. And Gardner Minshew. Yeah. How on earth, if I were to phrase it this way, and these are the best case scenarios for offensive players in this scenario. If I were to say, do you want Robert Woods or do you want Gardner Minshew? And I understand from an NFL front office standpoint, there's the salary to consider, there's the age to consider, all those sorts of things. I get it. I in no way understand how Robert Woods is worth a 6th-round pick. And positional players I know are not a dime a dozen, but certainly something close to that. But I mean, he's going to ball out in Tennessee, and that's awesome for him. So the next one we've got Davante Adams, already 29 years old. Can't believe that. Going from the Packers to the Raiders, right on the heels of Aaron Rodgers getting his deal, Adams getting traded for a 2022 first and second. And it's funny to see the contrast in the cost of these guys, considering he is the same age as Bobby Trees. But he's also getting a 5-year, $140 million deal, $28 million a year, about 66 guaranteed. I mean, the man's going to be 34 years old. And again, he's never been a speed receiver. He's a big-bodied guy, has good footwork, does have good athleticism, great hands. But, I mean, this was definitely a deal to get him in the door, get him playing with his old Fresno State buddy, Derek Carr. But, man, having to trade a first and a second and dish out that kind of money is bananas. But obviously, I mean, the Packers won in the sense that for them to be able to pay that, and I don't know, it's just one of those ones where if you're going to get a first and a second, why not? I mean, if they use it wisely, and I know that they usually just don't give Aaron Rodgers any weapons, I don't know how you don't use any of these early picks on a receiver. I mean, you have to at this point, because he's now lost Davante Adams. I thought he lost MVS. So now his wide receiver 1 is Allen Lazard. And that's not a bad thing to have him as one of these starting receivers. But it's basically just Allen Lazard. You got to do something more than that. I know Tanyan's coming back from an injury, but come on. If you don't use a first, in my opinion, on a receiver, he's going to lose his fucking mind. It'll be pretty funny, but he's going to lose his fucking mind. And I've got the last 3 here, all quarterbacks. These are all pretty wild deals, one of which kind of started every one of the dominoes going. So Russell Wilson going from the Seahawks to the Broncos. It was Russell Wilson and a 2022 fourth for 2 firsts, 2 seconds, a 5th, Drew Lock, Noah Fant, Shelby Harris. And he was top 13 each year in fantasy points per game the last 3 years. Russell Wilson was. Seeing this one being the first one, again, the domino to fall for all of these free agent or offseason transactions going on. It was wild to see, but looking at that Broncos roster, even after they traded those 3 guys and the picks, you have to do that. And why would you not? If you've basically been looking for that quarterback since you won that last Super Bowl. And even then, Peyton Manning was a shell of himself. Well, was still good enough to get it done. But they have a very good defense. I know they weren't able to get Von Miller back. He took a deal that no one would pass up at his age to go to Buffalo. But considering the weapons that they have in Denver, you got to pull that trigger. You got to bring Russell Wilson in. And that offense is going to be scary. And to couple that with that defense that already was very scary, bringing in a good cornerback like Surtain, they'll be all right. And the next one here, Carson Wentz, wearing just the most bold suit combination I've ever seen in my life. Wentz, he's going from the Colts to the Commanders. Still weird to say. It is Wentz, a 2nd and a 7th for a 3rd that could become a 2nd if he plays 70% of the games, a 2nd and a 3rd. And he's been top 20 each year, but he did go down from 17.8 to 15.6 points per game. And I know the big knock on him this past year, he had a more efficient year in terms of not turning the ball over too much, but didn't really seem to get it done in those right moments. And on a team that had a workhorse like Jonathan Taylor, had other good weapons, Michael Pittman, not too much else, to be honest. And now losing Jack Doyle, I know he retired. We'll see how that goes. I'm not too confident on it, if I'm being honest. I didn't think Heineke was terrible. I didn't think that he elevated could elevate them to the next level on a consistent basis. But he seemed to have those moments of just working his ass off to make it happen. And I guess that's good for a short term. But when you're looking for that long-term quarterback, that might be a frustrating thing to deal with. But I thought he did an incredible job. So I guess he won't be the guy anymore. It'll be Wentz coming in, and hope for the best for them. But they also did lose a lot of good defensive players too. And that's what they hang their hat on. So that division's not great, but losing a lot of those defensive players going from Heineke to Wentz, we'll see what happens. I don't know if that's a big enough step up. And last but not least, the big ball to drop recently, Deshaun Watson going from the Texans to the Browns. It was Watson and a fifth for 3 firsts, a third, and a fourth. And he was top 5 in fantasy points per game in 2019 and 2020. He, of course, did not play in 2021 with the allegations kind of swirling about. And I guess by now it was probably about a week ago or so, once kind of the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes, so to speak, picked back up after the grand jury had met and I guess decided to not go through and pursue a trial criminally. He still has some other stuff to clear out in terms of, I don't know what additionally legally that means. Criminally, I do think the civil stuff is still out there. And regardless of what happens with that, the NFL can still issue its own punishment in terms of a suspension, a fine, what have you. And I think they can do that, at least they have in the past, regardless of if he actually is considered guilty of anything. They've even done that for plenty of players that it's cleared up in the courts, but they still suspend the players for, 4 games, 6 games, what have you. But looking at this deal, I did end up in, I can't remember, I think it was in the middle of my rebuild on a Dynasty team I have. I never would have guessed that Watson and Cooper were going to be my stack that I had. And I never also thought that it was going to be on the Browns, considering, Cooper being on the Cowboys. They had talked about he could be the cap casualty even during the season. And sure enough, he was that. I never thought he'd go to the Browns. Watson, as all of that progressed, I am a Panthers fan myself. Seeing how it went, it's definitely the Panthers. It's Panthers and Saints. All the Falcons are here. All the Browns are here too. They pissed off Baker. That's a whole separate story. Browns are out. Panthers are out. It's down to the Falcons and the Saints. Oh, no. It's the Browns. We already made the deal. I don't know. It's crazy. I mean, I don't know what happened behind closed doors in terms of how all that got sorted out. If it was what bit of that was true. I know there's plenty of stuff swirling around where every team and beat writer and stuff would basically just be like, oh, it's done. They're going to this team. I guess none of that was true, or they thought it's some indication that maybe was the case. But needless to say, that Browns offense will be very, very good, and they will still have to see if he's going to get suspended for a couple of games. I'd have to think they would. I don't know if time served is going to be a thing since he was out all of last year. But that all was a mouthful. That all was a whole lot of free agency chaos going on, and it's only been a week and a couple of days. So I'll tell you what, very excited to see these last couple of dominoes fall, but also very excited to be getting into prospect season where we really get to see some pro days. We soon enough do get to see the NFL draft and see where all these people land. And then we're into the Dynasty rookie drafts, and that is my favorite time of year. And that wraps it up for this week's episode of Father Dynasty. Thanks for stopping by here with me in the manhole. If you could like, subscribe, comment, wherever you're watching this, YouTube, Spotify. If you're jumping over to the website, www.fatherdynasty.com, I appreciate any good feedback you have, bad feedback. Just change a couple of words and make it sound good and then send it over. Then I'll take it. But no, I really appreciate any support, going to the merch store, buying. Got the Nickelodeon purple again. So if you want the Nickelodeon purple, got it right here. Got the Kelly green, got the classic black. Got some sweatshirts for the men and the women, and I got some kids ones out there too. Don't worry. And got the mugs out there, so whatever you want to get, really appreciate it. And once again, for all those Dynasty daddies out there,